Happy Sunday, folks. Welcome back. Can we please get started with a volume check, if possible? I'm going to go ahead and share. What's up?
I'm not seeing anything.
All right, folks. Happy Sunday. Can everyone hear me? Okay. I guess I'll keep going, and then you'll let me know. All right. All right. Well, here we go. We have a lot of slides. We are venturing into the territory, a different domain. For the first time, we could consider it entering the territory of personal instruction, and this will take us away from the domain of common sense. What I mean by personal instruction is, once we graduate to a certain stage of practice, our mentors will present ideas and potential experiences to us that by definition are outside of our field of experience. And so we're gonna present some information today, just to support the continuity. If we were building an authentic practice from the ground up, this is kind of where we're at. And some of the ideas that are going to be that some of the slides that that are later in the presentation will probably be by definition outside of the realm of the experience for some of us, and there's no real way to commonsensically arrive at a certain type of revelation about some suggestion about our composition. So we call this Buddhist anatomy. Let's get into it. Precious human life endowed with liberty and opportunity. May we make the most of this precious human life. So we're doing some adaptation to the trigger slide warning, the trigger warning slide. Buddhist masters, great teachers, non-sectarian Buddhas, enlightened beings would say, why are we wasting our lives on things that are not actually going to deliver us the experience that we're looking for? We will give a shout out to one of the greats. Chandrakirti had a thought exercise to help encourage us to not be the dog, sunglass wearing, popcorn eating, television watching dog that barks at everybody and tries to nip at everyone's ankles. Okay, I'm just warming up, folks, trying to find the groove here. All right. So Chandrakirti's analogy is, imagine there's a scenario where two friends are being chased by brigands. They're being chased by brigands, or I sometimes use the metaphor of the Vikings are coming, right? The scouts have identified that the Vikings are coming, right? But we're just chipping away at stones. And so, our friend who alerted us to the situation is saying, what are you doing? I said, well, what are you doing, bro? I'm trying to make this stone that I found. I'm trying to turn it into a square. And dude says, okay, well, why? What are you going to do once you finish that? Well, then I'm going to throw it away and make another one, right? Meanwhile, every single moment that's passing, the Vikings are getting closer and closer and closer to the village, right? In other words, we haven't touched this theme yet, but we will in the coming weeks. Right behind the concept of precious human life is the concept of imminent death. right? So this is a precious human life, but it does have an expiration date, and we actually don't really know when that is. So we should get on with it, right? All right. So may we make the most of our precious human lives that are endowed with liberty and opportunity. Let's study the Dharma. How can we be certain that we're not the dog sitting on the couch, the sunglass wearing, popcorn eating, micro dog, um, IG obsessed, TikTok obsessed, micro sunglass wearing micro dog that nips at everyone's heels and barks and thinks that they're God of the universe? How can we be certain that we are not that person? Well, I don't know that I am or not, but maybe I should just recall that from a Buddhist master point of view, maybe the best thing that we can do is study Dharma or practice Dharma or something. It actually will give us the most fulfilling experience. All right. And so here we go, folks. Invitation to familiarize, invitation to familiarize, invitation to familiarize. As we stated last week and have stated many weeks, the entire you could distill the entire practice of Dharma into the word familiarization. What is it that we're attempting to become familiar with? Everything, our environment and its inhabitants, to the point of being so intimate with our environment and its inhabitants that we experience our environment and its inhabitants as integral parts of ourselves. And then by default, the byproduct of feeling intimately interwoven with the environment, our environment and its inhabitants, is that then naturally we become invested in their well-being, as invested in their well-being as we are our own. Okay, so this is the entire point. So you're going to see the slide a lot today. Let's just touch what it is that we're trying to familiarize ourselves with here at the beginning. Is being able to discern what is an authentic Dharma space and what is not, because appearances can be deceiving, and something might appear to be one way and it is actually the complete opposite way. Something might appear to be legitimate but is not. Something might not appear to be legitimate but is. And so, how can we determine what is what? We have the legitimacy smell test here. Are the practitioners being reminded of the prime directive, that is, that blind faith is not allowed? This is a scientist path. This is a DIY. Each person is charged with the task of doing the heavy lifting of the entire path alone. And so everything has to be tested and filtered through common sense and reasoning. Are the teachings touching life experience? Is it more than just the the dissemination of translation? Is there something? Does it feel like we're touching something wise that whomever is presenting, or the entire body of work of the space, speaks with depth to our life experience? Are there commentaries and writings that are in that space? Are the practitioners being encouraged to debate so that they can understand the concepts more fluently? Where is the space located? How modern does it feel? How relevant does it feel to contemporary life? Is the space challenging us? Is it challenging us to review our conceptions of ourselves? Is it challenging us to consider whether or not we should update or upgrade our status quo view of things? Or is it just letting us feel like, oh, it's so soft and peaceful, right? That is an element, but in addition to it being soft and it's soft and peaceful so that we can have the courage or the permission to question, right? And then the sixth point, given all of that, is it's even though it may feel like I say, blasphemous, is it still incorporating idea after idea, the traditional concepts, and referencing the traditional language? Okay, so this is our smell test. So just becoming familiar with that. All right, here we go into the presentation, folks. We call it Buddhist anatomy. You could call it Buddhist, anatomy / psychology. really what we're talking about is the composition, our composition as beings. That's really what we're talking about. When we say Buddhist anatomy, what we're really talking about is our composition as sentient beings, as human beings, our composition. Okay. And we've designed these lectures so that we have a proper foundation. And so let's just say from a traditional point of view, we would not approach these concepts without having the foundation of the Dharma compass, the three principal aspects, and the stages of the path that correspond to the individual and universal vehicles. And notice that we've gone in that order. And so here we are. So just familiarizing ourselves with that. This is the fun. In other words, another way to say this is that if I became a master of the fundamentals of the Dharma compass and the three principal aspects, my life would be amazing. And then, the icing on the cake could be understanding. One would understand experientially through having mastered the Dharma compass and the three principal aspects. One would understand experientially, meaning have the experience of entrance into the individual vehicle, graduation from the individual vehicle, and an entrance into the universal vehicle. One would have felt oneself transitioning from unsavoriness, wildness, to having tamed oneself, to having become noble, to having then become heroic, as evidenced by other people's statements about that person's performance in spaces. Okay, so in other words, that's a way to understand the fundamentals. Okay, so here we go. Getting into it, folks. Familiarization. This is an invitation for the rest of today, and maybe even just moving forward. Every time we see this slide, this is an invitation. What this means is an invitation to critically think about and memorize, maybe, so that we can critically think more thoroughly about what's about to be, what the slides are about to suggest, propose, say. All right. I want to try to also, again, distill the fundamentals. Were someone to be motivated to practice what we've been studying together, as one naturally does. I mean, I thought about adding the slide. Maybe we should add the slide for next week associated with this, that Tsongkhapa famously says that he took the teachings of the stages of the path as personal instructions. So in other words, as we're going through these, this systematic, you think of it as we're building a building and we're adding, height, and we're adding detail as we're going now, because we started with the foundation and now we're adding height and detail. This can be a practice. And so that we're trying to do is distill it in such a way as where we can touch in practice, in contemplation, in familiarization, we can touch point by point by point and build, let's say, energetically build toward maturity, let's say. So, excuse me, also, sorry, coffee break. So we have a concept here that we're going to call noble reasoning, and this is a way to understand the stages of the path, again, point by point. So, introduction to noble reasoning. So remembering what it is that we want from the beginning, right? Holding our aim in mind from the beginning. What we want is to reside in the zone of sustainability, meaning we would like to see 100% return on our investment of time and energy. We do not want to experience a life of dissipation. And therefore, what we actually want is to learn how to cultivate the associated causes that produce our capacity to reside in the zone of sustainability. And so there's basically only one cause, and there's two variants of that cause. The first associated cause that we can work with is being able to intellectually grasp who we are, why we're here, where we've come from, and where we're going. To have an intellectual grasp of who we are, why we're here, where we've come from, and where we're going. And then the second associated cause is then to directly directly experience and therefore realize, know with certainty who we are, why we're here, where we've come from, and where we're going. In other words, if we don't have any idea who we are, why we're here, where we've come from, and where we're going, we cannot cultivate the causes that produce our capacity to reside in the zone of sustainability. And so then you can say, then basically everything boils down to this last sentence here. The entirety of the path revolves around the central theme of the revelation of identity. The entirety of the path. The path revolves around the central theme of the revelation of identity. Okay, and so let's get into the noble reasoning here. In other words, this is a way to practice, to familiarize point 1, point 2, point 3 to every time. Let's say let's say that I wanted to really have a formal practice, then every time I would sit down, I would go through these things. I would touch these steps to feel how what type of inner experience that it evokes. And that would give me some sense of how familiar I am with the concept or something like that. So anyway, let's go through the steps. So the path, so noble reasoning, another way to understand noble reasoning is the path to the revelation of identity. And so step 1, and then these will feel familiar, right? We started with the Dharma compass. We went to the 3 principal aspects. We went over the stages, the individual vehicle and universal vehicle stages. So this is basically an encapsulation and distillation of that, right? So the path to the revelation of identity begins. Step 1, we generate the aspiration to acknowledge our basic insanity. In other words, do we have the courage to admit that we do not know for certain who we are, why we're here, where we've come from, and where we're going? And so then at best, what we're doing is putting belief structures in that place. I hope that there's some good place that I can go to. I hope that I have a soul. I hope I become nothing because all of this sucks, right? We basically have, when we don't know for certain who we are, why we're here, where we come from, and where we're going, we basically have 3 different, hope scaffoldings that we erect to give us some structure in life, right? Some reason to do things in life. We have this hope scaffolding called, belief in an afterlife of heaven or hell or something like that, called nothing exists. I don't believe in anything, or YOLO, or called reincarnation. And some variation of those may or may not be true, but we don't know for certain, right? And then actually this represents the most dangerous possible situation, because what it means is we don't have any clear way to evaluate ourselves or our environment. We don't know what anything is, and so any moment we might drive into a body of water, for example, right? Any moment I might do something that represents, now I become so addicted to this thing, and right? Any moment may be catastrophic because we're basically insane, and that means we don't have any idea how to evaluate what it is that we're experiencing. So the first step on the path to the revelation of identity is to generate the courage to admit that to ourselves, to admit that we feel like we don't belong anywhere. This place sucks, to admit that, and then to commit ourselves to eradicating the sense of not belonging, right? And so this is why, it is a big deal to begin the process of noble reasoning, or begin the path period, is that we have to grapple with what a Buddha might say to us, that is, hey, actually, it's fine, you're home, it's fine. And we don't want to, we've experienced too much trauma to be able to go from 0 to 100 and accept that is possible. So there's this huge barrier to entry to enter the stream or to enter the practice of noble reasoning, there's this massive barrier at the beginning, but this is the barrier. This is the first step. If we can do that, if we have the courage to do that, to make a vow to completely eradicate our sense of not belonging and not feeling responsible for our environment and inhabitants, then we can go to the next step, which is to generate the aspiration to become intellectually certain that our environment and its inhabitants are integral parts of ourselves. And being integral parts of ourselves, it's only reasonable to become as invested in the well-being of our environment and its inhabitants as we are our own, hand and career and family, etc. And so this is a process of analysis. We can examine analytically, intellectually, we can examine the dependence that we have on our environment and other people, and that makes sense to us. When that makes sense to us, we can go to the third step. We generate the aspiration to cultivate the spirit of stewardship, to become capable of bringing maximum benefit to our environment and its inhabitants, which again, from a selfish point of view, it makes sense that if my environment is thriving and its inhabitants are thriving, that's better for me. So that makes sense to do. And so then those first three steps correspond directly to the first tenet of the eightfold path, seeing things clearly. These are the three things that represent what could be called clear view or seeing things clearly. Right? This is the right way to see things, the right way to be motivated about things. Okay. Sorry, I'm having trouble pulling this thing out. Okay, so getting the cosine, do the thing, and you shall try it out. Again, when I showed this slide, this is us referencing the first point of the smell test. This is saying test and see for yourself. And here's two different people from two different traditions, from two different time periods that have both said the same thing. You want to build pecs, do push-ups. So they're cosigning the test. Process of testing. Okay, so step 4 on the path to the revelation of identity would be, now these are the series of vows. So step 4 would be to make a vow to commit the rest of this life to cultivating our speech, behavior, and our profession. Cultivating meaning making the most of our speech, behavior, and profession. That vow corresponds to the second through the fifth tenets of the eightfold path. Right resolve or right motivation. We call it vow. Appropriate speech and behavior and ennobling work. The fifth step then would be to make a vow to commit the rest of this life to mastering the practice of empathy, prayer, and aspirational bodhicitta. Those correspond to the sixth through the eighth tenets of the eightfold path: mental vigilance, constant remembering, and the taste of shared identity. What we should probably put in a step here is like in Being John Malkovich, they have the floor 7.5. We should have step 5.5 here. Step 5.5 is that were someone to be doing this, that person would, magnetize, would be drawn to and find a teacher. And, as we're analyzing our relationship to our environment and its inhabitants, we run into the principle of continuity. And so then that gives us the basis to make the next vow, right? So in addition to making the vow to commit the rest of this life to the cultivation of speech, behavior, profession, and mastering the practice of empathy, prayer, and aspirational bodhicitta, then we also make a vow to do that in all lives. And so that would represent then the graduation out of individual vehicle and into universal vehicle. And so again, the cosine slide, try it and see for yourself. Again, cosine touching the first prime directive. And here we go. So we went over universal vehicle last week. So let's review that now. Invitation to familiarize. The universal vehicle can be called the bodhisattva vehicle. The entirety of the universal vehicle, it basically pertains to a concept called the perfection of transcendent wisdom. And now what is different about, which is basically a way to view things, a way to interpret things, a way to interpret our experience, ourself. And what's different about that than the clear view of the individual vehicle. And so we talked last week about it being a higher octave of shared identity. And so let's just touch that, meaning there's something about it that can generate, there's something about it that will generate more intensity about how we use our body, speech, mind. Okay. And so that higher octave of shared identity is that basically when we analyze, we recognize that everything that we experience is actually giving us our sense of self. In other words, everything that we experience is our creator. In other words, the only thing that we're doing is living, moving, and having our being in God. Okay, and so then were we to reflect on this, were we to become familiar with the origin of our sense of self, we would become naturally um, intensely dedicated. We would become intensely devotional as well as intensely active and protective. We would simultaneously become intensely devotional and intensely active and protective, right? Because everything that we okay, anyway. So now, and I'm using the word God. I'm doing something blasphemous. I'm incorporating contemporary concepts to make ideas more clear. Blasphemous, aka this is very traditional, to try to use what is available to make a point. And so, when we say the word self, we think, oh, it's myself that drinks coffee, it's myself that poops, it's myself that goes on Instagram and scrolls for 2 hours, and we don't think of. So when I think of the environment as an integral part of myself, it's like, that's not very special. Who cares? Whereas the difference, the higher octave, so to speak, of the view of the perfection of transcendent wisdom is that everything that we experience is God, the highest possible thing, right? And so I also said last week that the word self from the from the perspective of the systems that we're importing, the word self can be synonymous with the highest, most transcendent thing. And so if we can say self and all simultaneously think that, that's fine. But anyway, my point is that Western practitioners need palatable linguistic triggers to intensify their response. Okay, so again, we're reviewing the universal vehicle, the bodhisattva vehicle, the bodhisattva attitude and lifestyle. The shared identity for real is that everything I experience is the origin of me. And then were I to really, let's say, were I to really know that in terms of the associated cause number 2, were I to know that experientially, know that in terms of the associated cause number 2, then I would be instinctively and reflexively motivated to steward every part of myself and to honor and serve God. I would be hyper devotional and hyper active and protective. I would be hyper protective and hyper devotional, hyper active and protective and devotional. But then in terms of not being yet at that stage of maturity, then in terms of practice, that would be our practice. That would be what a bodhisattva is trying to, the habits of interpretation and response, that would be what a bodhisattva is trying to develop, in other words, in the universal vehicle. Making sure, and then again, there are books and books about, making sure that you're properly engaging the maker and not giving your body away to every tiger that you see, or giving all of your money away to everyone, in financial need that you see. How do we properly engage this? Well, we need to be discerning, and that's why the slide is here. At the baseline, I'm rooting for every human being to win, but from a skillful point of view, I'm going to observe and analyze prior to investing time, money, energy, to see, how I can help and what would be helpful, let's say. I need to speed up a little bit. Okay, and so we come now to the Bodhisattva vow. This thing is amazing. May I become at all times, both now and forever, a protector of those without protection, a guide for those who have lost their way, a ship for those with oceans to cross, a sanctuary for those in danger, a lamp for those in the dark, and a servant to all those in need. For as long as space endures, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then, may I too remain to dispel the misery of the world. And so, were someone to be motivated to take this vow, that would indicate, and depending on, how someone feels, responds to saying those words, that would indicate that there is some evolution happening in our species, in our being, right? We're evolving into a different type of species. Okay, and so then that takes us to step 7 of the noble reasoning. In other words, the path to the revelation of identity. Having taken the Bodhisattva vow, we subsequently vow to cultivate ourselves in order to become capable of inspiring and educating others, right? That's what the whole vow is about. May I become a protector. May I become a sanctuary. May I become whatever is needed to whomsoever. May I become that. That's the vow. And then this corresponds to the 2nd through the 4th tenets of us trying to now cultivate ourselves in such a way as to become capable of expressing those virtues actively in the world on behalf of everyone that we consider to be the origin of ourselves, something like this, okay? And so then step 8 then is that we vow to become masters of theory and practice, right? Because how am I going to be able to cultivate myself in such a way? Well, then I have to master the theory and the practice. This corresponds to the 5th tenet of the 6 aims of a bodhisattva. And then obviously common sense. The only way for me to become a master of theory and practice is to find a master of theory and practice. So we acknowledge that we need mentors in order to master theory and practice. Therefore, we search for mentors and request teachings. And I think one of the daily dharmas, sorry for not having those active. We have some other things we're working on right now. One of the daily dharmas, I was quoting Emerson that, the search the search for spiritual masters is a dream of youth, but becomes the most serious occupation of maturity. The search for spiritual masters is just a dream of youth, but as we mature, that becomes the most serious occupation. And so then we acknowledge that in order to master theory and practice, we need to find spiritual masters and request teachings. And so then, then the arrow here, we begin to receive personal instructions, and these are opportunities then to flex mental vigilance and constant remembering. These are individual vehicle skills, right? And so I'm trying to tie the whole thing together. Here we go. We got to keep moving because I still have a lot of things. Cosine, right? Test it and see. Test and see how your life changes if you become as invested in the well-being of others, as you are yourself, and can actually do things. And okay, so just whatever. Okay, right. Testing. Here we go. Invitation to familiarize. We are coming up on the actual presentation. Invitation to familiarize ourselves with coffee breaks, which are essential. I think we're doing pretty good on time. We might actually have some time in case there are questions or anything this week. All right, here we go. Familiarization with Buddhist anatomy. In other words, when I say Buddhist anatomy, I'm also saying Buddhist anatomy and psychology. I'm saying that simultaneously. I'm also basically saying, our composition as beings. Okay, and there's basically 3 parts. And then you'll notice here why it makes sense, why it makes the most sense to talk about Buddhist anatomy after having talked about the vehicles, the stages of the path. So, in other words, we're basically made of 3 mind-body complexes. Human beings are basically made of 3 what are called mind-body complexes. The super subtle mind-body complex, and this corresponds to the Vajrayana, or the secret vehicle, or I like to call it the Buddha body. The subtle mind-body complex, this corresponds to the Mahayana, the universal vehicle, the Bodhisattva body, and the gross mind-body complex, the Hinayana, the individual vehicle, the foundation, or I call it the baby body. This is the baby body that you're born into. This body. I'm born into this body. I can give birth to a Bodhisattva body. You could think of that like there could be a Bodhisattva body residing within this baby body. And then within that bodhisattva body, then there could be a Buddha body inside of that. That's a way to think of that. Another way to think of this is these are the three bodies of a Buddha. A Buddha's body is the super subtle mind body complex. A Buddha also will take, a Yoda type of body, a force projecting type of body, as well as, and so that's called a Sambhogakaya. And then there's a Nirmanakaya associated with the actual emanation, the birth of, or the supplanting of identity, a Buddha in physical reality, we could say like that. Just maybe we could update that if we want to do more of this at some point. So anyway, so here we go. So let's unpack these a little bit. So the individual vehicle is the study and practice associated with mastering the gross mind-body complex. We could think of the gross mind-body complex basically as the Buzz Lightyear toy, right? The individuated machinery of sentient beings is like the Buzz Lightyear toy. The universal vehicle is basically the study and practice that's associated with mastering the subtle mind-body complex. The subtle mind-body complex is basically like the mold, like the thing that, or like the 3D printing, software information package, and like the programming options. And so each toy is basically cast from this mold. So you could think of that as the assembly line, right? And then so, on this point, everything that's related, everything about the universal vehicle is a commonality based, right? And so what's implied with the analogy of an assembly line and things being cast from a mold is that we're actually not different from one another, right? This is another way to try to be mentally vigilant and constantly remember that our composition, we're cast from the same mold, right? Okay, just wanted to touch that. And then the secret vehicle, what we call nuclear buzz, these are the final techniques that are associated with experiencing the super subtle mind-body complex. These are secret, they're private, right? They're not exoteric, publicly available. That's why we didn't talk about them. The secret vehicle associated with experiencing the super subtle mind-body complex, nuclear buzz. The super subtle mind-body complex is basically the power, substance, and intelligence. In other words, it's the factory. It's not only the toy and the assembly line, but it's the entire factory and et cetera. It's just a way to understand metaphorically each mind-body complex. In other words, each part of ourselves. And again, now we're running into what we could call personal instruction land, where there's no way to commonsensically arrive at some of the information that's about to be shared. Okay, so anyway, so here we go. Invitation to familiarize ourselves with each one of these mind-body complexes. In other words, our own anatomy -psychology, our own composition as beings. And now some of this will feel very familiar and some of it will feel very foreign. So let's start where we can with the baby body, the gross mind-body complex. Another way to think of a mind-body complex, you could think of it as a dimension or as a plane of existence. So the gross mind-body complex exists inside of the gross plane, which exists inside of the subtle plane, which exists inside of the super subtle plane. So that's where we are right now, a plane within a plane within a plane. And each mind-body complex has three components. The first is the sovereigning principle, or what we experience to be our sense of self. I'm aware that I am and that I can, but I don't know what I am it means or is. In other words, I'm aware that I have a sense of self, but I can't locate it or understand it. Whenever I look for my sense of self, I don't know where it is. It just seems to be like something that's there, Now, again, bridging the gap between common sense and personal instructions. So, what a mentor, authentic mentor should do is say, "Look at here's all these. I'm going to give you all this evidence about a certain understanding of a topic up to a point where it I don't I can't experience it. Even I can't even intellectually understand the common sense of it, right? Again, I use the analogy of traveling to New York City. An authentic mentor can give us the directions to New York City, right? And we how the hell would we know? But the trust and the teacher would develop from our own experience of testing it each time. The mentor would say, from this place, you need to drive 3 hours north to this place, and then you'll hit this, and you test it, and you do, and then it works again and again and again. So this is going to be an experience. We're literally going to do that experience, and we'll hit a slide, one of these slides where it's like that's outside. I have not experienced that or something. So anyway, so gross mind body complex component one, sovereigning, the sovereigning principle, we're calling it. We're aware that we think we exist, but we don't know what the hell that means. I can't locate my sense of self, but I feel like it's there. The second component in the mind-body complex, the gross mind-body complex is the gross mind. So mind can be associated with time. Again, that's like, the suburb, 2 hours south of New York or something, right? Mind can be associated with time. Okay, and then we'll step that down. So, you have the what is time? We call it, there's 3 times zones, something. You got the past, the present, and the future. So this is happening in our mind. Notice that you have memory and imagination in your mind. You have a past memory and you're imagining some future thing, or you're daydreaming and it isn't real or something, right? So the past and future are in our minds, as well as the present, that we're coloring our sense of self, meaning we're adding conceptions or narrative onto the sense of self. We're receiving impressions from the environment in the present moment, based on the coloring that we've assigned. We have a value structure. We categorize and value the impressions that we receive, again, based on how we've colored the sense of self. And then, the degree to which we're experiencing, the things we value versus the things we don't value, that becomes like our basis of emotion. We're like qualifying, this sucks or this is cool. It's cool because I'm in proximity to the things I value, or I'm not in proximity to the things I value, or something. So this is the gross mind, the nature of the gross mind. And then obviously we have the gross body. And, so we're just calling it very simply, there's speech in the mind and there's speech through the body, right? And the gross body, we're just calling it the instrument of instinctual satiation pursuit by the 5 senses. So this is the gross mind-body complex. We are familiar with this. We're all probably fairly familiar with the gross mind-body complex. And here we go. I probably got to speed up a little bit. Okay. Little coffee. So subtle mind-body complex. So the subtle mind-body complex, again, to give it as a dimension or a plane, it's influencing, right? It is the mold, in other words, from which all gross mind-body complexes are cast, is another way to think about the subtle mind-body complex is the mold from which all gross mind-body complexes are cast. Again, commonality, right? So it's influencing because it is casting, meaning forging, the gross mind-body complex, the gross, it's influencing, obviously, the gross plane. The subtle mind-body complex exists inside of the subtle plane, which again exists inside of the super subtle plane. Okay. And the 3 components, you'll notice there's a similar component here. The sovereigning principle, step down to will. I'm aware that I am and that I can, but I don't know what that means. In other words, even if we were to shift frequency, shift speed, and enter the subtle plane, we would do so in a subtle mind-body complex, and we would be experiencing. There would still be the capacity to experience there. And that's what the sovereignty principle, that's what I mean to say when I say that. Right? Okay. So I'm aware that I am and that I can, but I don't know what that means. I'm aware that I am on the receiving end of experience, but when I look for the self that is experiencing, I can't locate it. I don't even know what that means. Okay, so the component, the first component of the gross and subtle are the same. That sense of self is there, but we cannot locate it. Okay. Subtle mind, again, in terms of time, all archetypes are there. So everything in the past is there. All of the future responses are there. The capacity to experience itself, whatever we want to call pre-present, right? And then, so let me start by saying, past and present contains all archetypes. So this is why something like, the hero with 1,000 faces, or that type of literature starts to be relevant regardless of what time we've lived, or what tradition we study. There's some commonality. Again, there's some commonality that we can recognize when we're investigating the nature of the subtle mind-body complex, when we are in the universal vehicle. Like, this is something that we engage in as a practice, mastering the theory and practice associated with bodhisattva lifestyle in the universal vehicle. We've heard of the Akashic records as a new agey way to think of, all memories, the future, the fear of annihilation. We don't know what we are. We're grasping for it. We're hoping for something. I'll leave that there for now, just so we don't get lost in the sauce. And then the subtle body. So some of us, maybe most of us, have encountered teachings or information about the subtle body, the channels, the chakras, what we call satiation cycles, the drops. We're calling them ancestral artifacts. We can unpack all this at another time. The winds that are basically the essential energies, and then the primal protector energies of Eros and Thanatos. That's in the subtle body. Again, this is the mold making everything. Basically, it's casting. The subtle body is casting all subtle bodies, meaning they will all have that same biology. Let's say subtle biology. Every single gross body will contain the subtle biology of channels, chakras, drops, winds, primal energies. And every single gross mind will contain the subtle psychology of archetypes that can be accessed and embodied, essential fears, capacity to experience, memory, projection, etc. So let's go to this guy, and so what I did not say is that the body, you could think of the body as related to space, and the mind as related to time, the body as related to space. And then you'll see this frequently, that the gross plane and the super subtle. The gross plane is basically a plane, and the subtle plane has tiers to it, gradations of more and more subtlety. And you'll see these, especially when you're looking at, books that are preparation for death, basically. Luminance, radiance, immanence, and clear light. These are planes within the subtle complex. Again, this is information heavy, but it's important. I am going to make a point here in a few slides. It's information heavy. I'm aware of that, but I am going to make a point here starting on this slide. So then the super subtle mind-body complex, again, there's three components. The difference between the super subtle complex and the other complexes is that the super subtle plane is the super subtle mind body complex. That is, there is not a difference, there's not a distinction between the plane and the mind body complex. The gross plane exists within, is operated within a plane, and therefore, by definition, means it is not the plane. The subtle mind body complex is the same. It exists within, operates within, is operated within the plane. And so the super subtle mind body complex is the super subtle plane. It's the same thing, as well as the subtle plane, as well as the gross plane. In other words, God, in other words, or reality, truth, the body of a Buddha. Okay, and it also has three components. The animating principle, we're calling it here, we're just describing it as is. And so the nature of the animating principle is infinity in times, in other words, all times. The experience of the animating principle would be connecting to all times at once. And obviously the revelation associated with connecting to all times at once would be immortality. The second component of the super subtle mind-body complex is the diversifying principle, what we're calling the diversifying principle, everything everywhere. And so you could say everything everywhere is, right, when you put these two things together, again, because they're not separate. So you can think of it as three things at once, or, from a Western point of view, the Trinity, the Holy Trinity. Each one of these is God all at once, or something like that, right? And so you start to compound them on each other. And so then you start to see why things like Sat Chit Ananda are said, or the three, the holy, the threes being, everywhere. Anyway, so the diversifying principle, everything everywhere is, in other words, life is. There's no such thing as death. Everything is, evolving into various forms of isness, something like that, right? And so everything everywhere, the diversifying principle, the nature of the diversifying principle is infinity and space. And so then you can see of the nature of mind, right? Because we had time and space here, mind and body, right? Time and space. So the nature of the diversifying principle is infinity and space. In other words, all objects. The experience of the diversifying principle would be connecting to all objects at one time. And then when you connect, if you were to connect with everything all at once, you would feel it as a part of yourself, and there that you would be at peace everywhere, right? You would be basically at peace everywhere, right? And if you were to connect with all times all at once, you'd be like, okay, I'm alive all the time. I'm never not alive, and I'm at peace everywhere. I'm never not alive, and I'm at peace everywhere, right? That would be what someone who is experiencing the subtle mind-body complex, in other words, being initiated into the Buddha bodiness of whatever, would be experiencing. Oh, cool. Like, I'm alive all the time. I've always been alive all the time. I've always been alive and will be all the time. And I'm connected to everything, and therefore I'm at peace with everything. And then the third, I'm at peace everywhere, right? And then the third component is the sovereigning principle. This is what we call infinity in knowledge. Or all wants, the revelation of everything that is wanted and the associated satiations. And so the experience of that would be connecting to all wants and their and their associated satiations at one time, right? And so that's why they say that is the experience of being immersed into or born into one's Buddha body. Is there's a quality of omniscience about it. Not like I know every little detail and can do the physics of some complicated something or other, but really when they talk about knowing things, it's talking about knowing what things want, right? If we think about who we are, and you think about when you know someone, you kind of know the motivations and aspirations and like activity of that person. And so that's why this is. And so then you could think of someone who's experiencing these three things all at once, how that might radically transform one's view of oneself and the environment and the inhabitants, right? And so basically, again, what we're talking about is familiarization with self. So we go over the mind-body complexes after the universal vehicle, because there is the fifth tenet, the fifth aim of a bodhisattva is to master theory and practice. And basically all we're talking about is becoming familiar with who we are. And because of the most essential component of who we are is the subtle mind-body super subtle mind-body complex, which is everything, then simultaneously, if were we to make significant progress in knowing ourselves, we would also know what the hell's going on all over the place. So anyway, this is what is meant by know thyself. Taking responsibility for being alive and participating, taking responsibility for creating peace with everything that we experience. Okay. And in other words, the mind-body complexes and the associated planes and their associated planes become our objects of familiarization. This becomes our practice to try to become hyper familiar with our composition. Okay. Familiarization with coffee break. We're actually going to get it done. So just recalling now, why the hell is it that we want to engage in the practice of noble reasoning and start, treading the path of the revelation of identity? Because that is what eradicates the causes of our suffering. Again, remember why we're doing all of this, right? This familiarization to remember why we should be motivated to try to become familiar with our mind-body complexes and the stages of the path and the three principal aspects and the Dharma compass, because we don't want to suffer. And what's being proposed is if we do these practices, that we will suffer less. How do we know? We don't. But as we test, we start to see. So what are the two reasons for practicing? One is commonality. I don't want to suffer. Am I a human being? Are there other human beings suffering? Do they want to suffer? Probably not. The other is radical selfishness. It's actually better. My life is better if no one suffers. If everyone's thriving, that's the best possible situation for me. Therefore, I should practice empathy, prayer, and aspirational bodhicitta as the foundation upon which then I should practice the personal instructions I receive. The reasons for practice is that it's better for me if people are thriving. It's better for me if everyone is thriving. How can I do that? Well, first, let me be empathetic. Let me pray. Let me aspire to be helpful. And then let me practice the personal instructions I receive. And empathy, prayer, and aspirational bodhicitta are the foundation. Again, it's the foundation on which every other personal instruction is relevant, and useful. Like, in other words, nothing will work. In other words, you can think of empathy, prayer, and aspirational bodhicitta as the ceramic cup, right? Again, that's why they're called three principal aspects, whatever. The ceramic cup. If I don't have the ceramic cup, I can't drink coffee out of it. I can't. So it doesn't matter what personal instructions I put in to a non-existent cup. It won't stay there, right? So empathy, prayer, and aspirational bodhicitta as the foundation. And then when I have that, then I can incorporate personal instructions into that. How do I know that I'm doing it properly? Again, I'm not just fantasizing about it. I will feel the effects in the form of having the motivation to be stewards. This is the natural emotional response to successful study and practice. And what's a more thorough way to understand stewardship is that's the profound commitment to assist others in maximizing their evolutionary potential, and subsequently the realization that in order to do so, we must maximize our own. So just constantly recommitting to familiarization with Dharma compass, three principal aspects, individual and universal vehicle stages, as well as now the what we're calling our composition, right? Constant recommitment to familiarization and mastery of Dharma compass, three principal aspects, individual and universal vehicle stages, and composition, Buddhist anatomy, the mind-body complexes. And then we'll close again with just, traditionally dedicating whatever merit was generated during this session, dedicating that to the well-being of everyone, everywhere, forever. Just ending on bodhicitta, that how will we know if we're doing it the right way? Is we will start to experience spontaneously and organically a feeling that feels like love, but is colored with the wish to be able to do something about the unnecessary suffering that we see in the world. How do we know that our practice is working for real? For real, is we will start to experience spontaneously, organically and spontaneously, a feeling like love. It'll feel like love, but it will be colored with an intense aspiration to be able to do something about the unnecessary suffering that we see in the world. And again, yes. And closing with a refresher that as we start to have that feeling, then there are instructions. What's up with our motivation? How skillful are we at encouraging others to modify their behavior, because we recognize that behavior modification mitigates suffering. How skillful are we at encouraging others to cultivate the aspiration to perform more excellently, because we understand there's a relationship between quality performance and the mitigating suffering. How masterful am I? How familiar? Totally. Like, am I completely familiar with the theory as well as experientially, the teachings, and then, what's up with my realization? And we will close with Atisha, I, the Yogi Baker, can produce delicious cakes at will. Aspiring bakers, please follow the recipe or just test it out and tell me I'm wrong. When that will close, and we did it 2 minutes over, folks. Will you start a timer, please? We will set the timer for 30 seconds in case there are questions or anyone would like me to go back through a slide. Yeah, we'll revisit the 6 aims. You want me just to go through these one more time? Okay, so again, the general. So again, if we just go from the top, right? Maybe I can go from the. Maybe we can try to go from the top. Really, what we're talking about is familiarizing ourselves with what we're calling noble reasoning, right? And then, in other words, keeping our eye on the ball. Remembering what it is that we want most. Trying to remember what it is that we want most. What we want most is to have the best life possible, right? What we don't want is to not have a good life, basically, right? And so that's keeping our eye on the ball. What we want is to have the best life possible. and we're calling it, from a Dharma compass point of view, we're calling that the capacity to reside in the zone of sustainability. Now, as we went through the Dharma compass multiple times, we said that, the zone of sustainability does not inherently or eternally exist. It only comes into existence temporarily as a result of causes and conditions. So in other words, what we need to do is learn what creates the possibility of residing there, of living there, right? And so then what we discover is that the only thing that creates the possibility of residing, again, because the zone of sustainability, it comes into existence temporarily. You can think of your car, you can drive your car to work temporarily. I can only drive my car to work temporarily, meaning if there's not gas in the car, then I can't drive it. So there's some re-up that's required, right? There's a re-up that's required. So I pay my rent, I can live there that month. I pay my rent, I can live there that month. So you can think of it in terms of paying rent that allows us to live in the zone of sustainability. And so what we discover as we study and investigate is that there's actually only really one cause. There's only really one type of money, right? There's only one type of money that the landlord is going to take, right? They're going to take American dollars. You know what I'm saying? They're not going to take whatever other currency you want to try to give. There's only one currency that pays rent for the zone of sustainability, called the revelation of identity. That's the only currency that that will be accepted by the landlords of the zone of sustainability. Okay, so just remembering that. And then basically then, being committed to the noble reasoning exercise as a checklist each time we do a practice, right? And I'm saying this to take us there to the 6 aims of the Bodhisattva. So then, when we aspire to, when we recognize our basic insanity and we want to get rid of it, when we analyze our environment and recognize how deeply we depend on our environment for everything and how much influence it has on us, then we actually become committed to doing as much as possible for its health, right? And so that begins, that's why I said several slides ago, the whole path is basically a Bodhisattva path. You could think of it like that because it's other centered, right? Or in other words, we're being encouraged to be other centered right from the beginning, right? But we can't actually, it's like, even though you're encouraged to play in the NBA when you're 10 years old, like there's a certain process of maturity that's required prior to being able to play at that level. And so the individual vehicle, mastering the individual vehicle, is the requirement for being able to play as a bodhisattva, basically, is a way to understand that. So we generate a commitment to free ourselves from our sense of spiritual homelessness. We make a commitment to free ourselves from our basic insanity. We make a commitment to analyzing our environment, and then we have the courage to accept our need, our vital, our essential need for our environment and its inhabitants. We have the courage to say, actually, you, environment, are more important than I am. You, inhabitants of the environment, are more important than I am. We have the courage to take that knee, right, as we would say. We have the courage to generate the aspiration to cultivate, to become stewards, to try to help it. This is the beginning, right? This is taking us, obviously. Notice how bodhisattva-esque or bodhisattva-like that whole thing feels from the jump. And then we make the vows. Okay, I'm going to make the most of my speech, my behavior, my profession. I'm going to really try to master the practices of empathy, prayer, aspirational bodhicitta. As we're doing all of that, we start to feel more and more and more encouraged that what our mentors have suggested about our movement toward reality is real, is true. And so then we are willing to then take a bodhisattva vow, right? And and then enter the path, which basically then the bodhisattva path, the bodhisattva career, is basically you take that vow of eternal service, right? which is crazy talk. To a Westerner, that's YOLO. To materialists, this is crazy talk. And that's again why the Tibetans always joke that Westerners can't become enlightened, because we don't believe in future lives. In other words, we'd have to bet that continuity exists in order to even become a bodhisattva, right? So this is again from a contemporized point of view, and I do this with respect. Contemporized point of view, I'm rearranging. So the first thing that's required to be a bodhisattva is to take the vow of a bodhisattva. And so basically what that is a vow of eternal service, and that corresponds to patience. And the second thing is then to, perfect. I think we had this as the heart perfections in one of our things, right? the perfection of motivation or the perfection of heart, right? Perfection of what they call generosity. These are also called the 6 perfections, right? So the perfection of generosity, everything that I'm doing, even if I'm acquiring something, I'm doing that because I'm planning to give it away, something like that. That would be the bodhisattva attitude. even though right now I'm focused on becoming a trillionaire, I'm doing that so that I can give it away. Even though I'm focused on whatever, acquiring whatever, I'm doing that because I'm about to give it away. I'm actually doing it and simultaneously planning to give it away, right? And so then how perfect is our generosity, right? How, and then, the other thing that's associated when we think of bodhisattva is skillful means, right? How inspiring am I? And then like how radiant, how attractive in other words am I to others, that they ask me about how they can improve their lives to like mirror my own or something, right? And in other words, skillful means how skillfully can I inspire and educate others to address the root causes of their own suffering, right? And that's basically, again, it's just basically trying to encourage behavior modification and feeling invested in the well-being of the environment and its inhabitants, right? And so how skillfully can I inspire and invite behavior modification changes in other people? So that's basically 3 and 4, right? And then, you know, um, how studied am I, and what have I experienced? And that's basically the 5 and 6 that would stamp, graduation into then the secret vehicle. Happy Sunday, folks. We will see you next week. We'll have a little bit more information, because obviously then the question when it comes to as it pertains to, well, how do I know that the subtle mind is a real thing, or how do I know that any of these things are a real thing? The obvious question is how. Then what is the technique? I obviously am familiar with what my gross mind is doing, imagination, memory. Oh, I noticed that something or other, but like, how does one even start to have a shot at experiencing these other parts of oneself, right? And so then we're coming up on the practice or the technique, right, that's associated with the theory that we're currently reviewing. Cool. We'll see y'all next Sunday. Sending our best wishes. May you have the greatest week. May you have the greatest week that you've had. Sending you our best. LFG.